Hi, Viola. Today we will speak about your piece, Bulbble. Can you just shortly give some description of the piece?
Yeah, I built my bubble, which was my first instrument that I built by myself, from 2019. And at that time, I was very interested in building an instrument with lights that I can perform in some ways. And yeah, and then I put some light bulbs and relays and together. And initially, I built it with buttons that I can control. But over the time, I started developing a copper capacitive sensor that I can control. So the idea behind this, from the sort of interface perspective, was me trying to find a way to perform light in a very musical way. I find light is very musical, very subtle, but very complex. So I was interested in finding a system that can works with me as a musician, where I can turn these light qualities that I find very musical into musical rhythms, light, shadows, presenting different sort of subtleties and spontaneity that I could see at the time.
And who commissioned, right? Or it was your own?
It was a self-initiated project. I did it on my own. But in the end, it lines up very well that a string quartet in New York, Rhythm Method, they started a series in the Cell Theater, and they wanted to present music that is out of the box, and so I ended up premiering my piece over there.
And why is this title? Why Bulbble?
I thought I, I thought that was I wanted something quick and easy, and I find the piece very bubbly, like bubbly. But then I was like, um, but I'm playing bulbs, and so bubble, very quick and dirty way of finding a name for my instrument.
And how long is the piece?
Um, it's not like a traditional piece that you have a fixed duration. And I designed it for I designed the instrument for improvising. So 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 there's no fixed duration, but I usually play it somewhere between 20 to 45 minutes. If necessary, sometimes people ask me for 10 minutes, then I will also do it in
Okay,
10 minutes.
okay, great.
Yeah, so the range is pretty wide.
And can you just explain how this instrument is built, right?
Yeah, sure. Um, um, you mean component wise, or you mean?
Yes, component-wise.
Uh-huh. I so there are relays. I have over the time. Initially, I built it for 4 channels, and now I usually play with 8 channels. And so right now, the 8 channel ones has 8 relays, 8 light bulbs, 8 sets of controllers, and they're all powered by Arduino.
Mm-hmm. And then what you can as performer, what you can how you can play, what you can know, what you can change or adjust during the play.
Um, It's there are at least two levels of making the light perform. Two levels of execution that makes the light play in the way it's played. Is that one level is the interface design. So I have like I said, I have capacitive sensors that is made of copper tape, and they are programmed very, actually pretty straightforward. So there are three sets of controllers. One set is that when you hit a button, one light would flicker, and one light will flicker in a particular speed, and that speed is controlled by a potentiometer. So I have a little knob in front of me to control the speed. And that speed is mapped between the slowest is about maybe once per second, like the frequency of flickering. So it can be like take like pretty steady. And then the fastest speed is the fastest that I mapped it to how fast the relays can do. So the maximum capacity of the relay. And which is very interesting. It's about, I don't have a specific frequency, it's about 72 hertz, something like this. And so when you turn the knob up to around 30 hertz, actually, when you turn up to around 20 hertz, you started hearing the subtones. And then when you go up to 30 hertz, it's just acoustics 101 that you started hearing a pitch. And that becomes like a very mechanical synthesizer, if you want to say it like that. You hear a pitch that comes from the frequency of the machine flickering. And they all come from the sound of the relay, because it's an electromagnetic switch, and every time you switch it on and off, you hear a click sound. So these clicks, when it comes to higher than 30 hertz, then you started hearing a pitch. And I started using that as my pitch material. They're like, it depends on the space as well. Every time it's a little different. It's about like 10, 12 pitches that the switch can create. And then once it goes up to a point where the switch doesn't hit the circuit anymore, it doesn't have the sound anymore. And so that I call that the end of the spectrum. And so of course, whenever you flick the lights, you see the light bulbs flickering on and off. And when it goes faster and faster, you don't see the light flickering on and off anymore. It becomes so fast that you see the light being dimmed. And that's where I find a lot of qualities that can be played, can be presented in a very subtle way, like music. At least that's how I see it. I come from a classical music background, and I have like all the instruments that I built, I'm trying to play it as if I was playing the. Well, it's not like as if I don't want to play on a traditional instrument, but I like to find a way to transform what I like in playing music from traditional instrumental setup to handmade instrumental setup. So going back to the lights, when you tune them in different pitches, in different frequencies, you see the different qualities in the lights. So that is the sort of the basic design of it. And along the way, I find a lot of unexpectations, surprises. And one of them is, it's very interesting that I'm playing with the vibrations in the vibrating in the flickering system. And at the same time, this vibration system actually also work with AC power, the power from the wall. And so when you are in US, it's the wall power frequency is 60 hertz, and in Europe, the frequency power is 50 hertz, if I remember correctly. And so when I play the lights with the tuning the frequency, when it's about like when I'm in Europe, when it's 50 hertz, when you turn it to 49 or 51, you immediately see it because there's a one frequency, 1 hertz difference. And you see the light suddenly from flickering, freaking out, suddenly becomes a sine waves like fading in and out. It's very visual, and you can control it from my system because my system there's no fading mechanism in there, and oftentimes my lights are not dimmable, so they are not. You can't really turn it like a sine waves, like very smooth, like just fade in, fade out, fade in, fade out, very very smooth. And when you see that it's about once if the cycle is about once a second, then you know that it's either 49 hertz or 51 hertz. And when you turn it tiny bit, the control is not so much it's not like it's not very smooth, and so it really depends on how the switch behaves. And when you turn tiny bit, sometimes you see 3 cycles a second, and sometimes if you're lucky you can still keep turning very tiny bit and you will get 5 cycles per second. So it's either 55 hertz or 45 hertz. I don't have a perfect pitch, so that's how I get the information. But that becomes very musical, very musical elements. So these are the musical materials that I can really play with. I mean, of course, as a classically trained musician, of course, 3 cycles per second is just triplets, and 5 cycles per second is a quintuplet, and that contrasts very much with the pulses before 30 hertz, like ticka ticka ticka, or like a pitch like D. You and so these are different ways of generating contrasting materials. And at the same time, I find light is such a musical medium that is quite different from how sounds work in music. And so a lot of times I feel the temperature from the light bulbs. Sometimes in the beginning I was mostly working with incandescent light bulbs. So especially in the beginning, the warmth is part of it. Like you feel the temperature, you feel the flickering, you feel the very warm sensations around you. And at the same time, looking at lights, it's very musical in a very visual way. Like the different qualities just make me feel very differently on my body. It's very similar to listen to sound, but doesn't come from the ears, it's from the eyes. And that sensation is similar but not exactly the same. So I find that there are a lot of space that I can play them as music. And at the same time, just a matter of fact, you have light, and I have my body on stage, I have other stuff on stage, and so you create a massive shadows on the wall if there's a wall behind you. And so I also find that very interesting. I find that very musical also in a very unusual way, that it's not just the rhythm, it's not just the shadows. It's if you when you blow up the shadow, so when I play the light bulbs in front of me, if the wall is very close to me, then the shadow is very huge. And that if you blow the shadow as almost as high as the ceiling or the wall, the height of the wall, you I don't know. I don't know who like it's hard to describe because nobody really talk about it in that way, in that sense, but I find it very interesting that they because it's as tall as the wall, the size of the wall or the size of the room, the shadow, the performative shadow sort of create a illusion for at least to my eyes that the architecture is changing. Like in some ways, architectures are part of the very surface of it. It's all about playing with light and shadow in a space, and that's how you perceive the space. And I find it very interesting that when I play with light and shadow, that it's what it does to my eyes. Like it really changes the space in a very performative way because I'm performing. I didn't really care about the wall actually. Usually I don't see the wall, so I can only focus on what I play. Um, and and of course, before the show, I usually try to find a way to place my light in a way that has a very nice shadow play that has variety of shadows just coming out from mostly from my own body. And but then when I see the video or sometimes I made someone play my instrument and I see that in the space, that is very interesting that it really changes the architecture, my perception of architecture. Mm-hmm. And play in a musical way, that means the architecture is being played musically. And so I felt like that was the time that I could also play with the space, not just audioly, not just sonically, but also spatially, like not just so in the end I find out that the instrument, if it's in the right venue, I'm actually playing the sounds of the relays, I'm playing the musical quality of the lights, of the shadows, how they can be played together in a very concise setup just over my table. And at the same time, I can also play in the space when you view it from the audience perspective. So I find that very powerful. That is something that that was something that I learned over the working progress. So as you remember at the beginning, I was just like, I just want to do something with the relays that create pitches that can also trigger the lights at the same time. And so for me, the instrument became a big agent. Like they have a big agency in not just the lights, but the whole setup. The materials that I chose becomes they become a big agent, a big medium for me to really play with. So every time, so I really enjoy this improvising system because wherever I go, I just go into the space. I work with the distance of me and the wall and how the shadows can be played. In a way, it's very space sensitive. At the same time, it depends what is available. Sometimes I put all the light bulbs on the table. Sometimes I have all the mic stands hanging the light bulbs, and the shadow would be very different. The sounds is always the same. The sound qualities is always the same. But when I play it every time in different venue, I amplify it every time when I played it, and I realized that there are times that when in different speaker systems or in different acoustic space, some partials can be brought out a little more. Some in some spaces the sounds rings a little more. Sometimes audience would tell me that actually in that sound system, some frequency sits in that side of the room and the other frequencies sit in the other side of the room. So they are spatialized in in an unintentional way. I was unintended to. I did not intend to do this, but it becomes part of the piece, which I find it surprising and pleasant and fun every time we just go into the space and find out what what you can find. In a way, the instrument also doesn't just allow me to improvise; they push me to improvise.
Yes, but right, as I understand, it's both, right? It's lights and sound. It's usually you use this improvisational, so it's not all. They are not the same from performance to performance, right? The both layers are improvised, right?
In a way,
Or there are some kind of structure.
I mean it's these instruments are there are different levels of it. So to me, I always like seeing building circuit as a way of making my compositions because you decide how these things are behaving. And along the way, I mean, I didn't really have the background of engineering, so I really learned circuitry along the way. That I found out that the like circuit has different hierarchies, and it depends on how you put different buttons in different places in the circuit. You have different control over the lights. You have all, I mean, of course, I was using Arduino. There's also a layer of how I programmed it. There's a layer of how I put the buttons and controllers together, which one is more powerful than the other. In the early version of my lights, I have a button that is more powerful than the other one. So when I hit that one, I cannot control this one. And if I turn it the other way around, there was one time I didn't know I put the circuit the other way around, and the light bulb behaves completely differently. So that was the time I realized that okay, the circuit is not just about me doing things right and wrong. It's more about how I put it because they behave very differently. These are the things that just control how the current flows, how the circuit works. Essentially, the way you put the buttons and controllers, it's the way you control the behavior. So I started to realize that building circuit is a way for me to build my compositions. So you decide, you determined how the light bulbs are going to flicker, how you put your hands. So this light instrument is built for myself. And so I only need to concern my own body, how I put my hands, how I like to play it, how I like buttons to be put, how to put buttons in a way that I can have a very interesting combination of things. Or usually the way I do it is to find a way to maximize the possibility that
and what is like compositional structure for this particular piece?
Yeah, mostly like for this one, because it's relays, I mostly structure around the rhythmic structure. So how I put the buttons and controllers to create particular kind of not particular kind, so like that works in this way, like it has this kind of rhythms, and I decided that the range of the rhythmic range of the relays, that I decide and how I control it. And so the combination of the buttons and the knob that I can control, how much I can control, are they
Yes.
control
Yes.
for, I there are times that I mean that you can control it by saying I have 7 kinds of rhythms, but I decided to just making it a gradation so that I have maximum control by just turning a knob.
Yes.
And so it's really hard to exactly answer your question because I can only tell you how I decided, and that becomes my compositional structure, and I call it this way because however I improvise, there's space to improvise. What I wanted to, the reason why I explain all these things, because I realized, although I intended to make it an improvisatory instrument, I can't avoid this compositional layer that I need to decide where things are, because I'm not working with a machine that I bought somewhere. I'm working with a machine that I built. So there are a lot of things that it's very flexible. There's a lot of possibilities. And once I put them together, you don't want to change it in the middle of the performance, because I mean the way I do it, I solder everything so they're fixed. And but every performance, however I improvise with it, there's a character, there's a quality that you can recognize. This is Bulbble. And it's not another piece. And of course, there's also a layer of me always being the performer of the instrument. So the way I imagine music, this is another layer that I wanted to describe, but I forgot, and I moved on. Is that there's a layer that I work with my own body. I was very interested in translating the sort of musical things that so the musical imaginations that I have, and into this light setup on the controller. And so going back to the compositional perspective, I was only interested in working with myself on this instrument. Of course, later on, I started to bring this instrument playing with other people. That actually becomes a slightly different story, but a lot of things are really built according to how I imagine music, how I wanted to translate my music, how much flexibility that I want, how much fixed parameters that I want to have. And so these are the decisions. I see them as compositional decisions that I needed to make before the instrument was finished in the building process. And so I spent a lot of time also like working with the circuit. Once I built something, I played it, I go back to tweak it, and I played it, and I finished it. And I still play quite some time before I really say this is my instrument. I could as in a way that I feel like I'm very fluent in this setup. And so that's sort of my compositional approach these days. Like since then, all the instruments that I built, so far I built 4 instruments, and 3 of them were made for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And and each of them sort of based on this way of working to develop sounds and performances in different directions.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes, and what was the process, right, for building this instrument, right? How long it took, and what the stages you go through?
it's a continuous progress. I mean, always find that I always find that building instruments like that, it's a constant work in progress. And so for this light, for this bubble, I spent one day to realize that what I imagined could actually work. I was very skeptical. I was working with MIDI controllers, dimmers, with lights before, but I wasn't really satisfied. And and that was the time that I wanted to start. That was the time that I was tempted to build a machine, but of course I hesitated for a long time before I started. And it took me one day to realize that my idea actually could work. And then it took me, I mean, it's not so much about how much time I needed to build. It's not more about, like I said, I don't have an engineering background. I really needed to learn how to build a circuit myself. So actually, that took most of the time. It took me on and off 2 months to put the whole instrument together and premiere it. So it was about 2 months without working on it every day.
Yes.
Like you spend most of the time learning, putting them together. At that time, as a newbie, for me, took me about 2 days to put them together. So that was a version that I play with 4 light bulbs. So it's a smaller setup. Um, and once I built it, I think every time when I have had a performance, I took that as an opportunity to push one element a little further, like on the performance wise, on the performance level. Of course, the first one I play it in the way that I imagined, um, and then after every performance, you realize that there one more thing that you could do. And also, like I said, this instrument sonically and visually very space sensitive. I could only learn things by bringing it to another venue, play it, and see how it goes, and or to see what is available. Every venue has different things to offer, like the size of the table, the number of microphone stands that I could use, or the size of the wall. Or there was one time I learned it quite a lot because it was in uh I don't know what it was. I think it was used to be a market. It's like an old market that doesn't exist anymore. And they have a lot of wood pieces in the space. And um, and I decided to put that behind me, like it's sort of with a sculptural approach that play with my lights. And I realized that it it's not like I don't realize that there is shadow, but the way I put it accidentally has had a really nice effect. And that was the time that inspired me to really spend time to before the show to really put the light and objects in a way that could have very interesting shadow. Um, Not that I didn't do before that point, but that was the very interesting shadow that I that really motivate me to, like, next time if you have a chance,
Got it. Got it.
find the in the space, put your body in a particular way that has the most amount of interesting shadow. And so that becomes visual, spatial, yeah. And over the time, different space offer you different things. In the beginning, I was only focusing on expanding the gestures that I could do in the lights. And then I focus on the shadow, and then I focus on thinking if my controlling system, my controlling interface is a good the optimal one for myself. Like so I told you in the beginning, I have some buttons that I can play like a little piano. Some people describe it that way. And I realized that the button creates a lot of tension on my fingertip that actually doesn't allow me to play very long. Like after 20 minutes, I don't practice piano anymore. So it gets tiring very quickly. And also there are times that I really want to play fast, but then it's really limited by how strong my fingers are, which are not. My fingers are not very strong. And I really like intense music. I really like fast music. So what should I do? And so I turned that into I changed my interface from controlling buttons to putting all the copper tape on a flat surface. So right now they're all on papers. The paper is very light and very easy to like place it on the table, tape it down, and it becomes very flat and it allows your finger to slide very smoothly. When you slide, you can initially I thought when your fingers can slide without like a button or a key that has the resistance of being an object that you need to go over, um, it becomes a very fast way of hand controlling things. And at the same time, I realized because it's so flat, it's also literally on a piece of paper, and it changed my brain a little bit. It framed it. That was the first performance that I did on this paper controller. I thought I was drawing. So in the middle of the performance, I forgot that I was performing and I thought I was drawing on the paper. So I could imagine things, not just looking at the lights, also imagine the way I draw. And that stimulates more musical imagination for myself. And also working with the table, which is a flat surface, I have a wider haptic feedback. So I have more control how I touch the table without worrying if I hitting the wrong button. I can just a lot of times I work with how I hit the surface. Either I use the flat finger, standing finger, or you use more like a staccato touch or like push it, massage it. They all really trigger different sensations in my body that turns into uh, my musical material that I channel it out.
Yes, and right as I understand, this instrument is purely hardware, right? There is no software component.
Um, Arduino is part of it. um, it's powered by Arduinos. So Arduino is a small microcontroller, like a little small computer. So from it's so unfortunately it's not entirely analog, but I really like that the digital layer of it, the way you code, adds an extra layer of flexibility in your design. So, and also for me as a circuit newbie, it's a much easier way of making the instrument work.
Yes, and can you imagine the same instrument but without lights?
Yeah. Without the light, sorry.
Yes, yes, without lights. Yes, so that you the
Like
sound
just
only.
um yeah. um sure. I I guess sure, of course it can be done. But do I like it? I don't know because I came up with this idea um with the light in mind. And that was the device that I chose to use for playing with light. So in the big, so it's to me it's a priority thing that I control it with. I wanted to have some things to control my light, and I decided to use the relay, which also happens to have sound. I
Yes,
would imagine even if I wanted to just want to make a sound piece, I would like that to have 8 different sound source instead of have like I would dig into the sonic RAM to
Yes.
use different sounds for that. So I think it's a matter of artistic choice, but also it deals with preferences. So I guess right now I would not play it just without. I would not create an album, for example, to just have the relay sounds. But there are times that when I just wanted to play with some musicians, I wanted to find things that I have in my studio, then that's one of the things that I could play if I don't want to play with lights. There are times that the venue is too small, that too cozy, that I find the lights are too intense for some people. So definitely I have done it with when I collaborate with other musicians, but that's not something that I would choose for
Yes.
playing.
Can you imagine the same instrument but without sound? Only
Yeah,
light.
I've also done that. um, but then again, I would not choose relays as my as my instrument. So every component is decided. I initially I before I play with Bulbble, I play a lot with my duo partner, Nicola, who plays on guitar and ukulele these days. Um, we actually play together. So he played guitars and electronics, and me on the light. And I did have 2 separate setups that one one comes one comes with the relays, one comes from the dimmer so that you don't see the sound. So initially I was just very fascinated by how musical that I perceive light, how musical light is for me. And and I wanted to find a way to play with light, just light. And then I realized that, oh, actually I can play with sound. And then I realized that, oh, actually, if I have 2 setups, then I have one setup that has sounds, one setup that has light. So so that I have the flexibility to break the connection between sound and light. So light doesn't have to be musical with sound. Light can also be musical without sound. But there are times that it's nice to add the sound sonic component so that I have the variety playing in a duo. There are times that it's nice to hear the rhythms for me instead of seeing the rhythm for me. It just when you perceive music from a different sensory organ, it really triggers different sensations. So that's actually my whole idea with the light. And in the end, I like how Bulbble is just very focused. It communicates a concept very the concept of the setup itself is very clearly, very focused. And I really like that I can just bring one setup and I play it. So I always like to call it one of my many it's one of the light projects that I do, and different light projects that I do, I try to communicate different aspects of lights. I also did one time a performance of just non-sounding light, just with dimmers, and how to control light without sound. It was a small performative installation kind of thing that people just come, and then I start the performance without the sonic component of the light setup. So I was controlling the lights with dimmers, try to bring out different qualities from the dimmer. And in the program note, I encourage people to look into the light, imagine them, like relate the lights with their own bodies and the space, and how that create a musical experience for each of them.
And last question, what would be your free suggestions to other composers who would like to build their own instruments? What you have learned as the main things through that project, what would you want to suggest from and what you have learned, and from those, what from your learnings, right? Maybe you can say some suggestions to other composers.
Oh wow. That's a hard one because different people really build different things, especially people, there are quite a number of them in Berlin. I mean, of course, I mean, probably the father of that is I don't want to call it the father of it. I mean, there's what's that name? Tingley built a lot of instruments that like massive sculptural kinetic instruments that make sounds, that makes beautiful rhythms. There are quite some from the Fluxus, from the Dada. Of course, there's David Tudor. These days, there's Nicola Collins, Nick Collins, who built quite some instruments. I just saw a performance of his the other day that he put fingers on an old circuit board to make sounds. And there are young ones that I really like the work of Metri Blasco, who is a Spanish sound artist, instrument builder. Who else? I mean, there are different levels of there are different people. There are different people build things very differently. There are people who build their own machine and just play. Like they make their own instrument. There are people who are makers who extend their traditional instruments. And there are analog ways of doing it. There are people building controllers and extensions to help them spatialize sounds in the space. There are also people who like to, there's a group from Cologne, which is also very fun. It's a quartet of mannequin legs. And so they turn mannequin legs into instrument where they can bow, they can play it like a percussion, they can blow it like a saxophone, and it has, so this approach is like you use an object that is not seen as a traditional instrument, and you make it to sort of work very similarly to how you play in a traditional sense. There are people like Adam Putzmelby. He extend his double bass as very beautifully. He has an instrument called Fab. I think it's called Fab. This stands for feedback actuated augmented bass. And he built pickups for his double bass, and he put a speaker behind on the back of the double bass. So he drew a hole and put a speaker in it, and then it's powered. The whole thing is powered by Bella board, and that's the sort of system that he creates so that he can play the double bass that also plays with feedback from the bass itself. So this sort of approach is this sort of approach is a augmented like augmentation of traditional instruments in an unconventional way. There are people who are makers like Marco Donnarumma, for example, he does a lot of things that he pick up signals from his own body to create electronic music. And so there are different approach. I unfortunately can't name all of them.
Yes, yes, yes. No, the question was what you have learned from building this instrument, what you can suggest to others, right? Who would like to start, who would like to build his or her own first instrument, right?
You mean who to refer to?
No, no, no. Right? You build this instrument, you have learned something, you have some learnings, right?
Ah, okay.
And what would maybe you would share, right, to others, right, who those learnings, who just maybe thinking to start, right, their first to build their first instrument.
Where to start? Is that your question? How
Uh,
to start?
what would be your suggestions to those who are thinking to start? Yes.
Ah, oh, I okay. In my well, so for me, I always tell people to think big. I guess. I mean, it needs to be personal. So you need to really know, you need to think big, try to imagine what could happen, and you got to try. I think I learned so much just from trial and error. Like I really did not start from um looking into a particular kind of instrumental making, and I started at the time I don't know so many people who make their own thing. Of course, there are quite a number of people who does that for a very long time. Um, but I do think putting your hands on it and really be a good observer. Like if you like for me in the beginning, I just had one channel of relay and one light bulbs. I mean I was playing with light bulbs before, and so I have all these cords and cables I can just plug. But I have an Arduino, and I was like, well, I think I can put them together. I can program it um, in a way that I can make the light flicker. And that was just that. And that was the time that I did very, very, very little programming. And so you learn it. You ask people, you go online, you buy books, trying to learn the basics of the programming. And you just have to keep remembering what you want to achieve. And and once you learn it, you put it back to making it work, and then you look at how it behaves, and then you put your hands around it. I was like, okay, now I can see the light flicker. That's great. It's fun. What about, so my next question was, what about if I put a knob that I can control the speed? And I, in the beginning, I didn't know what it could mean when I say that. I was just say, what if? And I ask, I don't know, maybe let's just try. It doesn't hurt. And so I put the potentiometer, the knob in there in the circuit. Took me some time to learn it. And then I realized that, oh, it's not just from tick, tick, tick to tick, 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 tick to tick, 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 tick. It's also a spectrum of frequency that you can control. And I realized that, oh, when I was like, so what if I tune it to 30 hertz? And I was like, oh, I immediately hear a pitch. What if I tune it to 40 hertz? Oh, I really hear the pitch. What if I tune it to 100 hertz? And and I realized that the relay cannot do it because that's too fast. And so I started to realize there's a spectrum, there's a gradation, there's a spectrum of it, but there's also a limitation. And so I started to find out, okay, so where's the end point? this is how fast I could do. How slow I want to do, because you can do as slow as possible. You can have one click every year or something. And so I set the limit. So the switch set the limit of the highest point. I set the limit for the slowest point. And I spend a lot of time just to turn the knob to see what sort of music that I want to play. If I can play some kind of music that makes sense to me, that I like. And I realized that was the time I realized that the one channel is very limited. It doesn't have the complexity that I wanted. And so I put four together like a quartet. So basically the four channel of the same setup. And then I just put my hands, play, and I realized that the result was very satisfying at that time. And so that's how I started putting my instrument in four channels in the first place. So I would say I would say be courageous and just try. I mean, a lot of these things that can be done within a small voltage, so it should not hurt. Like it should be within 9 volts. So if anything happens, it's okay. um, if you do things with 220 volts, if you're in Europe and if you're in US, it's 110 volts, then you talk to someone who is good with it, to make sure everything is safe before you do it. But other than that, just put your hands in there and then literally just put your hands and just try to see what is possible. I think to me that is the most exciting part of making an instrument. You have to find your own way, and that would take longer time, but that makes the instrument unique, I would say.
Thank you very much
Yeah,
for
thank you.